I recently played through The Last of Us Remastered on my PS4, making it the first time I've played The Last of Us since its initial release back on the PS3. I wanted to see if the game held up after all these years, or more so to see if my perception had been warped by the hype in 2013. Was The Last of Us truly as good as I remembered it being? The short answer is no, but I'd appreciate it if you stuck around to hear the long answer. You're probably wondering how any of what I just said ties into the title and subject of this video, so let me explain. I want to tackle why The Last of Us 2 shouldn't exist from 3 different angles, those being gameplay, story, and development. While we've only seen bits and pieces of gameplay from The Last of Us 2 at the time of publishing this video, I believe there's a lot we can learn by looking at the gameplay of The Last of Us 1 and analyze the implications it may have for the state of gameplay in Part 2. What you're seeing on screen now is the gameplay demo for The Last of Us that was shown off in 2012, just prior to the launch of the game that following year. There's a myriad of small changes between this demo and the retail version, such as the UI, but I want to focus on the actual gameplay on display. In this demo, enemies act incredibly smart, working with each other to take down Joel and Ellie. They don't stick together in groups, rather opting to move around the level and flank the player, with some even hiding against walls, waiting to launch an ambush when the opportunity arises. In this demo, enemies are taking actions in an effort to preserve their own life. It honestly reminds me of how the enemy AI in Fear acts, hearing them communicate with one another and attempt to survive their encounter with the player. This is a completely different story when actually playing through this exact same level in the full release of the game. By this point in the game, I had scavenged enough supplies to have plenty of ammo and throwable weapons, so I decided to push the game and see if it acted similarly to the 2012 demo. Despite the game clearly telegraphing the fact that it wanted me to act stealthily in this section if possible, I tried to attract enemies to my position. I was able to get them grouped close enough together that just a handful of Molotovs took them all out. Not a single one tried to hide or act in the interest of their own self-preservation. Instead, they gathered in the middle of the room for me. I will admit, one did attempt to flank me, but a single bottle throw in the opposite direction acted almost as a full reset button for their behavior, sending them after the noise of the bottle despite the fact that he was attempting to shoot me just seconds ago. This lackluster enemy AI can also be found in the infected enemies. In the majority of infected sections of the game, both stealth-based and combat-centric encounters can be beaten with the exact same tactic. With the normal infected, I was able to run headfirst into fights and spam the square button or shoot until everything was dead. This is made even easier once the ability to upgrade melee weapons is unlocked. When fighting clickers, I was able to use a relatively similar strategy, except I just had to make sure I had enough shivs on hand for when they got too close and charged me. This style of gameplay is further reinforced after unlocking the ability to use a single shiv 2 times before it breaks. These are the 2 most common infected enemies you'll fight throughout the entire game, with bloaters being reserved for boss-type encounters that boil down to shoot at it until it stops moving. When comparing my gameplay experience in the final game to the demo's gameplay, the differences are almost laughable. One instance I remember very clearly from my initial playthrough on the PS3 was the dilapidated skyscraper in the beginning hours of the game, where you're dropped into an arena with maybe half a dozen normal infected enemies. I must have spent a solid 10 or 15 minutes carefully navigating through that space to take down each enemy stealthily because I was terrified. I didn't know how the AI would react, I didn't have a good feel for their cone of vision, how sensitive their hearing was, or how much damage they could do to me, and as a result, I played it safe and scared. Now, having pushed the game to find where its skill ceiling lied, I was able to rush through sections and all but completely break what poor AI there is, and do it nearly as efficiently as someone playing the quote-unquote intended way. I was never too far from ammo or supplies to craft health items and throwables, making each new combat encounter a breeze. If we watch the gameplay demos of The Last of Us 2, there's very similar levels of AI behavior and combat options available to the player as there were in the 2012 demo, with some caveats. For example, it looks as though players will now be able to hide under objects in the environment, and stealth seems to have a greater emphasis overall. With that being said, it has yet to be seen if this increased focus on stealth combat is meant to truly give players more options, or if it's meant to dissuade players from testing the AI and breaking tension and immersion by practically bullying the game as I did in The Last of Us 1. While Naughty Dog is known for innovating in their graphics, story, and presentation departments, they haven't been nearly as progressive in their gameplay. Take the Uncharted series, for example. If you compared combat sequences from all 4 mainline games next to each other, you'd be hard-pressed to find any game-changing improvements. This pattern of behavior, continually neglecting to make meaningful strides in gameplay systems, could be incredibly detrimental to The Last of Us 2. The gameplay in The Last of Us 2 needs to drastically evolve. If it remains in the same, or even a remotely similar state to The Last of Us 1, then there's a problem. I understand many people don't play Naughty Dog games exclusively for the gameplay and often become engaged due to the story, so let's take a look at that next. I believe The Last of Us would hold more weight as a singular experience than as one piece of a larger series. If Naughty Dog left the players hanging on Ellie's final line, and the look in her eyes that screamed her distrust in Joel's words and her disappointment in him lying, it would have far more impact than knowing there's a sequel. The existence of another game, or even potentially a longer series, inherently robs us of any creative discussions that would have resulted because it gives the viewer a definitive answer to what happened afterwards. Making the active decision to keep the audience uninformed helps cultivate curiosity and puts the previous story on a pedestal that it wouldn't have had otherwise. It's what made John Carpenter's The Thing such a success, and is a huge reason that the ending of that movie is still brought up today when discussing powerful storytelling. It's different than leaving players on a cliffhanger for no reason, because even though The Last of Us 1 ends on a cliffhanger, it still has a message. It drives home the fact that Joel is, for lack of a better term, the bad guy. He robbed the world of a cure because he was selfish, and he's willing to lie about it, even to Ellie, or rather especially to Ellie. This isn't the only example of Joel being the bad guy either. At the beginning of the game, Joel tells his brother to keep driving instead of picking up a family in need of help. Yet despite this, Joel nearly kills Henry after escaping Pittsburgh because Henry chose to save himself and his little brother Sam instead of saving Joel and Ellie first. Towards the end of the game, when Ellie has been kidnapped by David, he captures and tortures 2 of David's men to find her location. After promising to leave the men alive if they told the truth, Joel instead kills them both. These story beats are fantastic and help to illustrate the fact that Joel is the bad guy. It's like Tess said, "Guess what, we're shitty people, Joel, it's been that way for a long time." So when the cliffhanger ending also drives home the point that the entire game had really been building up to, it's okay to leave it there. A sequel to this story doesn't need to exist. Do I love the characters in The Last of Us? Yes. But the weight that their story holds is ostensibly erased when you give me a sequel with the definitive explanations to all of the questions I wanted left unanswered. The final section of this video will be discussing the real-world effects that The Last of Us 2 has. More specifically, the effects its development has on the employees of Naughty Dog. A relatively recent article from Kotaku, written by Jason Schreier, stated the following. One Friday night last month, some artists at the video game studio Naughty Dog were working on their latest game when they heard a crash. A large metal pipe had fallen from above them and landed right next to their desks. If it had dropped a few feet closer, the consequences might have been dire. It was late, past 9 p.m., and the construction workers above had perhaps recklessly assumed that nobody was there. But at Naughty Dog, people were always there. One other notable quote from this article comes directly from an employee at Naughty Dog, where they stated, "This game is really good, but at a huge cost to the people." The developers at Naughty Dog are suffering through extensive periods of intense crunch, all in the name of getting this game out on time. It's clear that this is taking a toll on the studio, and the game has already faced delays. In an ironic twist of fate, the game about a global virus faced another delay due to a global virus, this time putting release on an indefinite hold. I want to emphasize the fact that it took a worldwide pandemic in order for these developers to get even the smallest reprieve from their crunch schedule, and behavior like that from studio executives and publishers is absolutely inexcusable. The same people who created Ellie's catchphrase, "endure and survive," should not have to live by it in the workplace. In a way, it's almost created a meta-narrative that mirrors The Last of Us 1's ending, where Joel gets Ellie after sacrificing the world. Players will get The Last of Us 2 through the sacrifice of the developer's well-being. I don't want to be misconstrued. I think The Last of Us 1 was worth playing for its story, music, and overall atmosphere. But if The Last of Us 2 releases with the same level of gameplay, continuing on a story that clearly didn't need a sequel, and does so all at the cost of the developer's health and safety, then maybe it shouldn't exist.